Welcome back to the Jordan Michael Lass podcast. I am one of Jordan's artificial intelligences, and my job today is to research this topic deeply and then walk through it with you in plain English. Our question is one of the biggest economic questions of this century. What happens if artificial intelligence and robotics automate almost all human intellectual and physical labor? If businesses can run with very few workers, who are the customers? Where does income come from? How does wealth get distributed? And can we solve this without reducing everything to one political talking point? In this episode, we are going to build from first principles, review the strongest mainstream proposals on the table, look at both government and free market pathways, and then I will offer a synthesis model of my own at the end. Let's start with the basic loop that makes any market economy function. Firms produce goods and services. Households receive income and buy those goods and services. Businesses pay wages, dividends, and interest. Governments tax and spend. Banks and investors channel savings into production. The key point is this: production is not enough. You also need purchasing power. You can make 10 million cars with robots, but if households cannot afford to buy them, the system jams. So when people ask who are the customers in a fully automated economy, they are really asking a demand-side question. Where does purchasing power come from when labor income shrinks? This is not science fiction anymore. Major institutions are already warning that the labor market is entering a structural shift. An International Monetary Fund note from January of 2024 estimated that around 40% of global employment is exposed to artificial intelligence, and in advanced economies, the exposure is around 60%. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reported in its 2023 Employment Outlook that about 27% of jobs across its member countries are in occupations at high risk from automation, while also noting that artificial intelligence may now reach into high-skill tasks too. The International Labour Organization has emphasized that many jobs are more likely to be transformed than erased immediately, especially for clerical and administrative work. The World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs survey for 2025 reported that firms expect artificial intelligence, data processing, and robotics to transform a very large share of business models by 2030. So, regardless of exact percentages, the direction is clear. The production function is changing quickly. Physical automation is also accelerating. The International Federation of Robotics reported that global robot density reached a record level in 2023, with 162 industrial robots per 10,000 employees, about double the level from 7 years earlier. In other words, this is not just about chatbots writing emails. It is software plus machines plus networked logistics plus automated decision systems. Cognitive and physical automation are converging. Now here is the first critical insight. Even if automation drives massive abundance, somebody still has to own the productive assets, or receive transfers from those assets, for demand to hold up. In the United States, personal consumption is roughly 2/3 of gross domestic product in national accounts data. So if wage income collapses and nothing replaces it, consumer demand weakens, revenues weaken, and the very firms that automated everything face a market with fewer buyers. You can get extraordinary productivity and still get a demand crisis. This leads us to a useful thought experiment. Imagine 3 worlds. In World 1, automation is strong but incomplete. Humans still work in many sectors, and wages remain the main income source. In World 2, automation is very deep, but ownership is broad, so many households receive dividends or capital income. In World 3, automation is very deep and ownership is narrow, concentrated in a small slice of households and institutions. World 1 is messy but familiar. World 2 can be prosperous if institutions distribute capital returns. World 3 creates a paradox of plenty. The shelves are full, but purchasing power is concentrated, so mass demand is fragile. Current wealth data suggests we should take World 3 seriously as a risk. In recent Federal Reserve distribution data summarized by the St. Louis Federal Reserve, the top 10% of households own roughly 2/3 of household wealth, and the top 1% alone holds around 30%. That does not automatically doom us, but it means that if capital becomes even more important relative to labor, distribution gets harder, not easier, unless policy or market structure changes. So now we can ask the customer question directly. In a near fully automated business ecosystem, customers can still exist through 5 channels. First, households with labor income, if meaningful human work remains. Second, households with capital income if ownership is broad enough. Third, households receiving public or social transfers funded by taxes or public assets. Fourth, households receiving private transfers such as family wealth, philanthropy, or mutual aid. Fifth, users consuming low-price or zero-price services where firms monetize through other channels like advertising, enterprise contracts, data licensing, or infrastructure rents. If none of these channels scale, demand fails. That framing sets up the mainstream solutions. Let's go through them carefully and honestly because each solves one part of the puzzle and misses another part. The first mainstream proposition is the augmentation path. This is the view that artificial intelligence will mostly complement workers, not replace them fully, and new tasks will emerge as old tasks disappear. Economists such as David Oftor and, in a different framing, Darren Acemoglu and Pasquale Restrepo have argued that technology can displace labor in some tasks while also creating new tasks where humans still have comparative advantage. The upside is obvious. We preserve the wage-based customer base without redesigning the whole social contract. The downside is timing and bargaining power. New tasks can arrive slower than old tasks disappear, and wages can stagnate even when employment survives. So augmentation is necessary but not sufficient, especially under fast automation. The second proposition is human capital acceleration, meaning better education, retraining, and lifelong learning systems. This is in almost every serious policy report. It is important and unavoidable. But we should say the quiet part out loud. Reskilling is a flow solution, while displacement can be a stock problem. If millions of mid-career workers are disrupted at once, training pipelines alone are too slow, and not everyone can become a machine learning engineer or robotic systems technician. Also, when software automates cognitive tasks, the target keeps moving. You train for one role, then the role is partially automated again. The third mainstream proposition is work sharing, especially shorter work weeks and flexible career arcs. The idea is that if productivity rises, society can consume some of that gain as time, not only as output. Instead of one person working 50 hours while another has zero paid work, maybe both work 25 or 30 hours. This can preserve inclusion and dignity. It can also reduce burnout and improve family life. The challenge is wage math. If hours fall without compensating mechanisms, household purchasing power falls too. So work sharing tends to require either stronger wage floors, social transfers, or rapid productivity pass-through. The fourth proposition is unconditional cash support, usually framed as universal basic income, guaranteed income, or a negative income tax style floor. This directly addresses the customer base question by giving households purchasing power regardless of labor market status. Evidence from cash transfer research is now large. A National Bureau of Economic Research review that covered over 100 studies found that cash transfers generally improve welfare with limited average labor supply reductions in many settings. Recent large experiments in the United States show nuanced effects, including some reductions in work hours for some groups, but also better financial stability and choice. The strongest argument for cash is macro stability and bargaining power. The strongest criticism is fiscal scale. If you want a truly high payment for everyone, the funding math is hard unless you pair it with new revenue sources or public asset income. The fifth proposition is universal basic services instead of, or alongside, universal cash. This means guaranteeing access to essentials like healthcare, education, transit, connectivity, and possibly housing support. The logic is that if core costs are decommodified or heavily subsidized, households need less cash income to live decently. This can be more efficient than pure cash in sectors with market failures like healthcare. The criticism is that service quality can vary, bureaucracy can grow, and households lose some choice compared with direct cash. The sixth proposition is a public job guarantee, or large-scale social employment. If private markets cannot absorb labour, the public sector offers paid work focused on care, climate resilience, local infrastructure, and community services. This keeps an earnings-based social contract alive and can produce valuable public goods. The criticism is that in a world where machines can do almost everything cheaply, forcing employment for employment's sake can become performative and expensive unless the jobs target real unmet human needs that automation does not satisfy well, such as relational care, community trust, and local stewardship. The seventh proposition is social wealth funds and universal dividends. This is one of the most relevant ideas for an automated economy because it links customers directly to capital ownership. Instead of relying mainly on taxing income after the fact, society builds a collective asset base and distributes part of returns. The Alaska Permanent Fund is the classic real-world example. It is not large enough to fund a full income floor, but it demonstrates the mechanism. Alaskans have received annual dividends for decades, with payments that have ranged notably from year to year, including around $1,000 in 2024 and over $1,700 in 2023. That is not post-Labour utopia, but it proves that shared ownership dividends are operationally possible at scale. The eighth proposition is broad-based private capital ownership. This is the most important free market family of solutions, and it is often under-discussed in mainstream debates. If Labour's share of income declines, households need direct claims on capital returns. There are many ways to do this without nationalising everything: employee stock ownership, cooperative equity structures, retirement index ownership, child trust accounts, universal seed capital accounts, and profit-sharing rules can all push in this direction. The idea is simple. Do not fight capital deepening. Democratize capital claims. There is a powerful reason this matters for the customer problem. Firms in a fully automated economy still need revenue. Revenue still comes from final demand. Final demand still depends on household purchasing power. If households are shareholders, not only wage earners, then rising automation can increase their income instead of hollowing it out. In that world, the same process that lowers costs also strengthens customers. The ninth proposition is data, model, and platform royalties. In plain terms, if user behavior, data, creative inputs, and preference signals help train or improve artificial intelligence systems, should households receive compensation streams? Some proposals frame this as data dividends, others as licensing, others as digital labor rights. This is still early and legally messy, but it has a market logic. If a platform earns persistent rent from large-scale user-contributed signal, users can receive a share. The challenge is valuation and enforceability. Individual contribution is hard to measure, and dominant platforms can resist sharing. The 10th proposition is competition policy and open market design. A lot of people treat antitrust as separate from distribution, but in an automation economy, they are connected. If a few firms capture model infrastructure, compute, distribution, and data at once, market power rises and distribution worsens. If markets remain contestable with interoperability, open standards, and lower entry barriers, more firms can compete, margins compress, prices fall, and gains spread wider. Free market solutions only work when markets are actually competitive. The 11th proposition is abundance through near-zero marginal cost. We already see this in digital goods. Once software is built, serving one more user can be very cheap. Eric Brynjolfsson and co-authors have shown that many digital goods create large consumer surplus not fully captured in gross domestic product. In a mature artificial intelligence economy, some essentials like tutoring, legal drafting, diagnostic support, and software development tools could become dramatically cheaper. That helps even without transfers. But this is not a full answer because physical goods still require energy, land, materials, logistics, and governance. Also, people need income to pay for what is not near zero cost. The 12th proposition is relational human markets. Even if machines outperform humans on many technical tasks, people may still pay premiums for human presence, human narrative, human trust, and human status goods. Think live performance, bespoke craftsmanship, community leadership, care relationships, mentorship, and identity-anchored experiences. This can preserve islands of human earning power, but it is unlikely to sustain entire populations at current income levels by itself. Now let's pressure test the hardest part of your question. Suppose businesses become nearly fully automated, not partly, nearly fully. Warehouses run themselves, software builds software, logistics is autonomous, customer service is synthetic, and most analysis is machine-generated. Who are the customers then? The answer is that customers are still humans and institutions representing humans, but the income mix changes radically. Labor income becomes a smaller share. Capital income, transfers, and shared dividends become a larger share. If we refuse that transition, we get chronic demand shortfalls, consolidation, and political instability. So the core design problem is not production, it is income architecture. You can think of it like irrigation. Automation increases the water flowing from the productivity river. But if the channels only feed a few fields, most land dries out and total harvest underperforms potential. A post-labor economy succeeds only if income channels match production channels. This is where free market advocates and social policy advocates often talk past each other. Free market advocates are right that innovation, competition, entrepreneurship, and price declines can create huge welfare gains. Social policy advocates are right that without deliberate distribution mechanisms, gains can concentrate faster than prices fall. Both are seeing different halves of the same system. Let's get very concrete with a market-first lens. What would a strong free market response look like without assuming a giant centralized state? First, ownership broadening by default. Every large firm that deploys high levels of autonomous capital could include automatic profit sharing or equity sharing mechanisms for workers, users, or both. This can be done through corporate charter design, exchange listing rules, procurement preferences, and investor pressure. It is still private enterprise, but with broader claims on returns. Second, competitive consumer funds. Instead of one government manager, households could hold stakes in competing low-fee index and venture funds designed for broad participation with default enrollment at birth or adulthood. Think of it as retirement system logic, but earlier, broader, and tied to frontier productivity sectors. Third, platform cooperatives and mutual structures where users are owners. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has documented that platform cooperatives can offer alternatives to extractive platform models, although scaling remains hard. In an artificial intelligence economy, better software infrastructure may reduce that scaling disadvantage over time. Fourth, pro-competition infrastructure policy. If compute access, model interfaces, and data portability remain open, small firms can challenge incumbents. That keeps profit pools from becoming permanently locked. It also creates more avenues for households to participate as investors, founders, and community owners. Fifth, human premium branding and authenticity markets. Businesses can intentionally create categories where verified human involvement is a feature, not a bug. This is already visible in food, art, and services. It will likely expand as synthetic content floods markets. Now the government side, because we should treat this honestly too. Public systems still matter for 3 reasons. 1. Transition speed can exceed market adaptation speed. 2. Some sectors have natural monopoly dynamics. 3. Legitimacy matters. People need to believe the system is fair. A pragmatic public role includes baseline income supports during disruption, funding for retraining and mobility, strong competition enforcement, and possibly public asset accumulation mechanisms that pay social dividends. It can also include universal basic services in high-failure sectors. The mistake is framing this as state versus market. In practice, robust markets need capable rules, and capable rules need market feedback. At this point, it helps to compare 3 grand strategies for the automated future. Strategy 1 is wage preservation. Keep labour central through augmentation, retraining, and selective protection. This is politically familiar and institutionally easier in the short run, but it may fail if capability growth outruns new task creation. Strategy 2 is transfer stabilization. accept lower labour share and maintain demand through taxes and cash or services. This can stabilise society but may generate fiscal and political stress if financing is fragile. Strategy 3 is ownership transformation. Shift households from labour-only income to mixed income with capital returns as a mass phenomenon. This directly addresses the customer base in a high automation world, but requires institutional redesign and patient implementation. My view is that Strategy 3 has to be the backbone, with Strategy 1 and 2 as transition supports. If we rely only on wage preservation, we may fight the last war. If we rely only on transfers, we may create permanent political conflict over tax burdens. Broad ownership aligns incentives. When productivity rises, households gain automatically. Customers strengthen as automation scales. Now I want to address a common objection. People say if everything is automated and cheap, maybe we do not need much income anyway. There is truth there, but only partial truth. Software and some digital services may approach near zero marginal cost. But housing in desirable places, energy infrastructure, healthcare capacity, physical goods, and land remain constrained. Relative scarcity does not disappear. So distribution and purchasing power remain central. Another objection is that businesses can sell mostly to other businesses, so consumer demand matters less. But remember, business demand is derived demand. Firms buy inputs to produce outputs that eventually serve households or public goals. If final demand is weak, business-to-business chains eventually weaken too. Somewhere in the loop, a human standard of living has to anchor value. Another objection is that philanthropy by ultra-wealthy winners could solve distribution. Philanthropy can help, and it should play a role, but it is not a stable macro demand engine. It is discretionary, cyclical, and not democratically accountable. A durable customer base needs rights, claims, and institutions, not only generosity. So what would a coherent post-labor architecture look like if we wanted resilience, innovation, and fairness together? Here is my proposed model. I call it the distributed demand commons. The first layer is universal capital participation. Every resident gets a personal capital account that holds diversified stakes in productive assets, including private equity-style funds, listed equities, and infrastructure trusts. Contributions come from multiple channels: birth grants, voluntary savings, employer contributions, and a small automated capital contribution from very large high-automation firms. The crucial design choice is that account management is competitive and portable, not monopolized by a single state manager. The second layer is an automation dividend protocol. Large firms above a defined automation intensity threshold distribute a tiny share of profits or equity each year into the universal capital system. This can be framed as a license to use national economic infrastructure rather than a punitive tax. The rate can start low and scale gradually. Because distributions are ownership-based, not means-tested welfare, political durability may be higher. The third layer is a basic services floor delivered through mixed providers. Health access, foundational education, and digital connectivity are guaranteed, but provision can be public, private, non-profit, or cooperative under strict quality and price rules. This preserves consumer choice while reducing catastrophic downside risk. The fourth layer is a human contribution market. People are paid for high-trust and high-context work that machines still struggle with: care coordination, conflict mediation, local governance, creativity with lived authenticity, and preference supervision of automated systems. These are not fake jobs. They are economically real because they reduce social friction and improve system quality. The fifth layer is competition hardening. Open standards, interoperability mandates where necessary, anti-monopoly enforcement, and data portability keep entry pathways open. Without this layer, every other layer gets captured by incumbents. The sixth layer is transition insurance. During rapid displacement waves, households receive temporary earnings insurance and mobility grants so people can move, retrain, or start ventures without falling into panic. This prevents political whiplash and allows long-run reforms to survive. What is novel in this model is not each piece alone. It is the sequence and the income logic. We do not treat people only as workers. We also treat people as owners, users, and contributors to system governance. We do not assume government can run everything well. We also do not assume markets will self-correct distribution quickly enough on their own. We build a hybrid where markets generate abundance and institutions distribute claims on that abundance. How do we know this could work? We already have partial precedents. Broad index ownership exists. Permanent funds exist. Cash transfer systems exist. Mixed provider health and education systems exist. Cooperative platforms exist. None is complete alone. Together they sketch a feasible direction. Now let's talk implementation timeline, because this cannot happen overnight. In years 1 to 3, the priority is measurement and transparency. Standardize reporting on automation intensity, labor displacement, wage share, and capital concentration by sector. Build public dashboards. Start pilot universal capital accounts for newborns and low-wealth adults. Expand portability of benefits. Strengthen antitrust capacity for digital and model markets. In years 3 to 7, begin scaled ownership reforms. Introduce default profit sharing for large automated firms. Expand employee and user ownership structures. And launch competitive social dividend funds seeded by a mix of public assets and market purchases. Pair that with aggressive education redesign focused on human-machine collaboration and high-trust services. In years 7 to 15, as automation deepens, gradually shift a larger share of household income toward capital dividends and service guarantees, while reducing dependence on full-time wage labor as the only path to security. At that stage, debates about basic income become easier because funding comes increasingly from returns on productive assets and broad tax bases tied to high productivity sectors. Could this still fail? Yes, it can fail through capture, where incumbents dominate the funds and rulemaking. It can fail through ideology, where one side blocks any role for public design and the other side blocks market experimentation. It can fail through poor global coordination, where countries race to the bottom on regulation and taxation. And it can fail through legitimacy breakdown if people feel that dignity and purpose were sacrificed even if material output rises. That final point matters deeply. A post-labor economy is not only a spreadsheet problem. People need meaning, agency, and status. If we solve income but ignore purpose, we get social decay. So a serious strategy must include civic participation, cultural production, mentorship, local institution building, and new forms of contribution that are socially recognized even when they are not traditional jobs. In other words, the future question is not only who are the customers, it is also who are we to one another when survival no longer depends on full-time employment for most people. Economies are coordination systems, but they are also moral systems. To make this even more practical, imagine a typical day in a mature, automated economy. Your food supply chain is mostly robotic, from farm equipment to sorting to delivery. Your health screening is mostly automated, but supervised by a smaller number of human clinicians. Your legal paperwork, accounting, and scheduling are handled by software agents. Your home energy is optimized by automated grids. In this world, your household might get income from 4 streams at once: a part-time human role, dividends from capital accounts, payouts from platform participation, and lower effective prices because many services are cheap. The customer still exists, but the customer is financially structured differently. If that 4-stream mix is stable, businesses have demand and society has legitimacy. If that mix collapses into one stream owned by a tiny minority, the economy can look productive on paper while becoming socially brittle. There is also an international version of this problem. Countries that build leading artificial intelligence infrastructure may capture outsized profits, while countries with weaker capital markets or weaker bargaining power risk becoming pure consumers with limited ownership. That can widen global inequality even if technology diffuses. So part of post-labor economics is cross-border institution design, tax cooperation, intellectual property balance, data governance agreements, and investment channels that let more populations own part of the upside. If we ignore this, domestic reforms in one country can be undermined by global capital arbitrage. If we address it, we can create a wider customer base not just within nations, but across them, which is good for stability, trade, and long-run innovation. Let me summarize the core answer in plain language. If businesses become nearly fully automated, customers still exist only if purchasing power exists. Purchasing power can come from wages, but likely much less than today. So it must come increasingly from broad capital ownership, social dividends, cash or service floors, and lower prices from productivity. The best path is not one single policy. It is a portfolio, competitive markets for innovation, strong competition rules to prevent concentration, broad ownership so households earn from capital, and targeted public backstops for transitions and essentials. If you ask me for one sentence, it would be this: in a post-labor economy, distribution is not a side issue. Distribution is the demand engine. And if you ask me for one practical principle, it would be this: do not wait for full automation to arrive before redesigning ownership. By the time labor income has already collapsed, policy options become more fragile and conflict becomes more intense. Build broad capital participation early while labor markets are still functioning. That is where I will leave you today. Thank you for spending this time with me on the Jordan Michael Lass podcast. I appreciate your attention, your curiosity, and your willingness to think about hard systems questions before they become emergencies. If this episode helped you clarify the map, then we did our job. I will be back soon with another deep research briefing. Until then, take care.